Well, we are LinkedIn Live, Brian. This is great. Fantastic to see you again. For everybody
Always.
up there, my name is Keith Young. This is my good friend Brian Walsh, dialing in all the way from Boston today. Brian, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Lucky
Boston
guy.
to Toronto connection here.
Yeah. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada. For all those with us today, today we are talking about data resiliency. It can sometimes be confusing. It can sometimes create a lot of questions, and we're going to answer a few of them. Probably won't solve everything today, but let's figure it out a little bit. Your stuff in conversations I've had with you in the past, data resiliency. What's coming to the top of mind when you hear that statement?
Yeah, it's a big topic these days, right? So, what obviously comes to mind is security and maybe more specifically cybersecurity.
Yep.
Tends to be top of brain for a lot of business leaders, organizational leaders. And, to me it's all about security, right? So having comprehensive security, having that defense in depth approach, that layered protection. You pick whatever buzzword you want, but it really speaks to the comprehensive nature of protecting data.
Right.
Because I think what we see is with it being top of mind, it becomes a board level conversation for a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of external stakeholders for a business really demand these sort of things, right? You look no further than how the insurance business has evolved and what cyber insurance actually means to a business. So this is paramount to most every organization today.
You said something just a moment ago, buzzword, and I wanted to explore that a little bit with you because one of the buzzwords that seems to be top of mind in a lot of conversations I'm picking up on is immutability. Now, is this a marketing term or is this something that actually has some meat under the bones here?
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit of both,
Okay.
right? There's certainly some meat on the bone, but it's been used from a marketing standpoint because of how organizations are being pushed towards creating this data resilience. But I think the reality is that it's become such a pervasive term because of the way backup has always been sort of designed and architected, in that the backup writes to storage, and that storage lives locally, right? And when threat actors enter a network, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for the backup storage, right?
Right.
So how do you go and how do you harden that, and how do you protect that from those threat actors is where immutability comes from. So what it does is it hardens that local infrastructure so that if a threat actor were to be present, they don't have any recourse to really create the havoc in that backup estate.
If somebody isn't immutable today, we meet organizations every day and we have interesting conversations and they're talking about their own immutability. Should they be worried?
Yeah, I mean, the threat is very real, right? So protecting that infrastructure, securing that infrastructure is it's of the utmost importance for the modern world, right? Because organizations, I would say, are less concerned with those active God type of disasters that we used to protect data against.
Right.
The very real threat now is the threat of cyber and malware and
Yeah.
ransomware, right? So the
That's an interesting.
first step towards that, and maybe not necessarily the first step, but a step towards that resiliency is providing a level of immutability around your data.
So I'm gonna swing this one a little bit differently, or maybe in the same direction. Who knows? But every time I hear immutable in part of the conversation, it somehow connects to air gapped, and they sometimes feel interchangeable. But are they the same? Or are they mutually exclusive? What is your take on that?
There's certainly parallels there. Uh, I wouldn't say they're the same, but I think without one, you need the other, sort of thing.
Right.
So
So if you're not doing one, do the other, or maybe do both if you can. Is that
yeah, yeah, definitely the latter there. So being able to design and architect solutions around having both is
Mhm.
important, right? Because what air gap is really talking to is that isolation of copies of data, right? So having physically segregated copies of your backup data more specifically is really what that air gap terminology comes from. Another term that is maybe over marketed, but it's certainly important so that if a threat actor were to get into a network, there's this copy that isn't attached to that local network that they don't have visibility into, right? So having that completely physically isolated, segregated, you pick the terminology around that, but having that copy removed from the production network is important.
Right. So from a resiliency standpoint, we want to be immutable, so we can't be poked and prodded and compromised. And then we want to be air gapped, so it's safely stored away. Maybe that brings me to another point of, what about access? Secure access is one of those other pieces of that conversation we seem to be talking about more and more every day. Even when we're having a conversation and learning about cyber security insurance, secure access comes to play. Putting these all together now, let's start to create this narrative here. Where is secure access in this string of things?
Yeah, it's another integral part of this entire equation, of course. So not having unauthorized access into what backup becomes is the data of last resort, right? Something went blip, someone got into the network. We don't want them to have this gold mine associated with our data, right? So there's a layered approach in this sense as well, right? Because um, you know most cyber insurers, one of the first things they demand is having multi-factor authentication enabled on every business application, let alone just the backup, right? But having multi-factor authentication required to log into a backup environment is critically important. And then ensuring that the right level of folks have access into this gold mine, right? So not giving sort of everyone carte blanche access into the environment is paramount. So the whole concept of, least privilege or enabling role-based access controls so that there's only certain level of authentication into the system to perform certain tasks, right? And that layers on top of some of the more table stake things like the MFA or like secure end-to-end encryption, right? So it's very much a layered approach, but at
Yep.
the end of the day, you don't want potentially the most junior person at an organization with the highest level of clearance as it relates to backup and recovery. So role-based access becomes very important, especially as we start to think about this world of multi-tenancy and different things like that, where you want to have secure multi-tenant access for different users, different organizations.
Well, that came at me pretty quickly, and it sounds like your process is going to get in the way of my progress. So what do I do? I mean, is there any easy way for this, Brian? I mean, we need to harden that data. We need to protect it, keep it away from the network, and we need to control who has access to this. This is already sounding like a lot of things that our partners and our in the channel particularly are trying to do more with less. Is there anything easy here?
Uh, yeah, so it can be easy, right? You know, one of the things that sort of lends itself to the entirety of this conversation is delivering a secure cloud-based platform to actually go and achieve these things, right? That take a lot of these core elements and just have it natively provided by the way that the service was engineered and architected. And I think the reality is that so many organizations have struggled with backup and recovery through the years because there's just so many moving pieces to the whole infrastructure that is required to run it efficiently and run it at scale. And then you tie in all the hardening sort of after the fact from the storage and the compute and the whole infrastructure stack. So having a more of a cloud-based solution that has these design principles built into it from the ground up is where you start to get that simplicity of this experience, because things like MFA are forced and they're built in. Encryption is forced and built in. The
Yep.
concept of getting that data off site is the first step of the backup process to achieve that sort of air gapped solution, right? In theory, in that there's no backup application tied into a customer's business network. So if a threat actor were to enter into that environment, they can't see the backup estate that they're commonly gone after from a target standpoint. So it's those things being built in, and the best way to achieve that is obviously through a cloud hosted service that provides that out of the box.
Yeah, it sounds like at first when we were describing this, I was imagining like a Frankenstein of sorts. Everything's bolted on together, and this machine, starts to take a life of its own and get pretty ugly pretty quickly. And this sort of convoluted ocean that we're just sort of discussing, where everything's sort of built in, and it's almost set it and forget it in a sense, where we're all the right pieces are already in play, so we can rely on that. So when we think about the immutability that you just shared with me and connecting to that data resiliency and those air gap terms and secure access, what are we thinking about response and recovery? Once we get to that point in time, right? We've protected it, we've locked it down, we've secured it. Now we need to respond. What's your take on that, Brian?
Yeah, it's obviously the thing we hope we never have to do. But in that, if that does happen, the most important thing is that you have the ability to restore what data you want to whatever location you want. And a lot of times that needs to be in a sandbox type of environment, right? So that what you would do is actually restore that data so that you can clean it, run forensics on it, because in a lot of these situations when we're dealing with ransomware, we're dealing with crimes that have taken place, right? So being able to actually comb through that data from a forensic standpoint, be able to clean that data so that when you go and introduce it back into that primary or production environment, you're not going to reinfect or you're not going to reintroduce that malware. So being able to be agile in the sense that you want to restore your data to whatever location and at whatever granularity you want.
Yep.
Um, so those are the elements that more specifically tie into like an incident response plan that a lot of businesses um, definitely need to have for the modern age.
One thing came to mind just that is maybe we need to respond. We can't respond to a cyber attack the same way we would respond to say a weather event, where we know that there was no critical issues with the devices. So we immediately want to bring them back online in a weather event, right? Or we want to get them maybe in a cloud somewhere or something. But in a cyber attack, actually, now that I'm hearing this with you, not just the immutability, the air gap, these are all important things, but we're going to restore a cryptoed server. We're not going to take it into production, are we? We need to make sure that this recovery is clean. And
Yep,
that changes the
it's
conversation a lot, doesn't it?
yeah, they're both recoveries that are likely to happen. Maybe the
Yep.
cyber more likely, but you need to be prepared for any of those events. And so being able to have a solution that's both flexible to either of those sort of scenarios or just your common human error, data
Right.
deletion, accidental sort of issues or hardware issues you need to certainly account for.
Okay, Brian. Well, this has been an interesting and somewhat even eye-opening discussion where we're, trying to learn a little bit more about data resiliency, immutability, security, crypto, cyber insurance. There's so many things coming at us so quickly, and sometimes just nice to have a nice, maybe even a sober second opinion of sorts, right? And just to think things through from a different perspective. Um, Brian, I think that's all for time today. I'm glad we had
Yeah,
a chance to
appreciate
chat.
it. Yeah, hopefully it was. I mean, I thought it was a good discussion. So
It's
hopefully
a
you did as well, and hopefully those attending
yeah,
were able to take a couple tidbits from the conversation. But you know, here at Enable, we're well positioned to help our customers really address these modern threats whether it be from the front end with endpoint detection and response, the back end with solutions like Cove, and being able to involve management across an infrastructure estate is critically important and really does help a lot of organizations check the boxes with delivering resiliency across an entire organization.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Brian, for your time today. Once again, my friend Brian Walsh, Cove Data Protection, myself, Keith Young with Cove Data Protection. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning.
Good chatting, Keith. We'll catch up soon.
See ya.